Thank you very much, Joe and George, for your invitation here. I'm pleased to join with you today. It's very impressive to talk with people from all over the world. I would say a few words for introduction linked to the speech we had before, because the Frenchman Pierre de Coubertin, who was an aristocrat here in France, was the one who had the idea of Olympic Games on a modern way. And he was linked with the peace congresses. He was introduced in 1889 in Paris to the Peace Congress, and he was a liberal pacifist. His idea was to make peace through sport, and that's the point today. I'm sure that each and every one of us dreams of a peaceful world and strives to foster it. This is our responsibility as citizens and also as researchers. This was the vision of Coubertin, but his project that is based on an inescapable horizon, the sporting confrontation. How can we produce sport with a confrontation between nations? That's the difficulty, which is very economical, is the gathering of the athletes. Of course, for the athletes, it's a wonderful peace program. But for all the world, it's more difficult. And as Bob Edelman from University of San Diego and Christopher Young have written, they say sport is the softest of the hard power and the hardest of the soft power. And it is this history and its current challenges that I invite you to discover based on my 25 years of research into the International Olympic Committee. Here you can see 3 presidents from the IOC between the years 1925 until 1972. And they are considering the global sphere, of course, as Charlie Chaplin also, in a very famous movie. This is all about my education as an historian involved in sport history, peace studies through sport, and geopolitics, because a lot of journalists, they want to know more about the Olympics, especially in Paris today. France is a very charming country. I am from French origin, sorry for that. Even if I'm working in Switzerland. It's a very charming country, and charming from the monuments, of course, the food and the culture, but also very charming for its political debates, as today you have in the first floor. It was a very political moment. It is not so easy to make the history and to think about Olympics, because the institution itself, the International Olympic Committee, is producing its own history. And for a researcher, we want to be very neutral from the institutions, of course, as the IOC wants to be neutral from the states. So we have some confrontations sometimes about the history, but anyway, I'm positioned at the crossroads of international relations, political and social and cultural realities, and with a true interest in gender, post-colonial, and visual studies also, because it's all about sport. So we must see the bodies, and the bodies are the incarnation of all the realities of the world. A few words about my comprehensive framework. It's about all some prejudices about sport. We have in mind some ideas: sport is neutral, sport is apolitical. It's more complex than that. Sport itself, it's just a concept. It's a way of giving a noun to realities where the bodies are engaged in movement and competition. But each of you have different, probably, approaches and definitions for sport. It's not so easy to speak about sport. And more or less, the researchers and so the journalists, they say sport is mirroring the society. Not exactly. It's a parallel world. The world of sports, it's not exactly our world. It's a special place with a special moment, particularly for international competition. And sport is not at all so democratic and so modern. You can find in sport some things and habits which are very old and very conservative. And also it could be very innovative at the same time. Both of them are true, and we must consider that. For we have different planets. Here I wrote about two planets, the planet of sport and the planet of states. But you have also the planet of business, the planet of medias, and so on. And sport international relations are at the crossroads of all these forces. And it gives a special responsibility for the international committee to be outside all these forces, but is not able to do that. And you have this concept of autonomy of sport and apoliticism of sport, who was an idea forged by Coubertin himself before First World War, because he was assaulted by the states, by the merchants who want to make money with sporting competitions. It is more than 100 years ago. And he forged this idea of neutrality and apoliticism. This is good. Of course, we all want to be involved in cultural events, academic gatherings, and so on, or sporting meetings, and we all want to be far from the lowest level of politics, not far from humanist issues, but far from the politicians who are involved in bad things. And the problem with sport, because of a representation of nations, is that the states are poured into the sporting relations because of that reality. You know, from the first beginnings of the Olympic Games, there were no uniforms, no national uniforms in the competitions. The athletes, they had their own T-shirts, jerseys, and they won from the clubs. But from 1908 in London, these national Olympic committees, they made a selection of the athletes, and you had, for the first time, you had the countries represented through the hymns, the uniforms from the nations, and so politics were poured inside the Olympic Games. And that's the problem today. Sport neutrality is very ambitious, but all the reality of our last century is all about wars in sport also. Because the fascist regimes, but also USSR, and then other countries which are very authoritarian, but also the democracies. They want to take some privileges, take some issues from the international relations and competitions, and that's a problem for sport. The IOC has built a parallel world, which is not exactly the political one, not exactly the economic one, not exactly the mediatic world, etc. But it is at the crossroads, and that's interesting to understand how they manage with this issue. The Olympics and the IOC are like a phoenix, the bird which rebirthed from the fire. Because each time we should think it could have disappeared after the two wars, after the Cold War also, after the Salt Lake City scandal, which was about corruption in the institution, and also this doping scandal, which appeared in 2014 in Sochi, Russia, during the Olympic Games, and actually in the present time with the war led by Russia in Ukraine. How can we have athletes representing nations which are in involved in wars, how can they represent their countries? Are they manipulated by their countries? That's all the problem. And the decision of the IOC recently was to say, for Russia and Belarus, no uniforms, no anthems, no flags, and also no athletes who took the floor in favor of the war, no athletes coming from clubs who are close to the police, to the army, or to the secret services. That's very new. During the war in ex-Yugoslavia, Serbia and Montenegro was authorized to participate under the United Nations impulse, but it was only without uniforms, flags, and anthems. That the athletes' biography was not Christianized. They were not interrogated. That's very new. These words built by IOC, because the IOC was confronted to very big pressures, so they tried to make alliances with different powers in the world. They tried to be close to artists and writers, to doctors and scientists, sometimes for the best, but sometimes for the worst also. For example, just after the Second World War, the medical doctors, they tried to differentiate the women and the men. And they chose the women to prove they were exactly women. And the young ladies, the women sport athletes, they had to be nude in front of doctors, but they could say they are really women. This is not acceptable. And nowadays, it still exists, this discrimination, because the women are the ones who have to make the proof they are women. It is not asked to men, still nowadays. That's a big issue. And for example, the way for women who has a testosterone level very high, they ask the women now to take medicine to lower. But for example, if I can say I'm a man with our colleagues, also men, but we don't have the same testosterone level at all. But there is no problem for men to compete against themselves. So that's a big issue, of course. Sometimes the IOC wants to promote his Pacific motto and ideas, but sometimes also he wants to hide things. And that's why they have, along them, they have this International Sports Press Association. If you don't have the pass from this association, you cannot go inside the Olympics and have your work as a journalist. That's also an issue. Sponsors, also, of course, since 1985, until that period, the IOC did not want any money inside the Olympics. And from now, they conclude some contracts with Adidas at the beginning, but Nike, and most of them are American, but also Japanese, Korean, and Chinese nowadays, with Alibaba, for example. The IOC also had problem with national justices. If you are an athlete, if you have a problem inside your sport, if you want to go on a trial, you cannot. You must go to your sporting federation first, and then in appeal to the international federation, then to the tribunal International Tribunal for Sport in Switzerland, and on a formal way you can appeal to the Switzerland Supreme Court, but just for formal things, not in the grounds of the problem. And that means that if you have a problem with just the way to be or your definition as a person, it is about discrimination. The world of sports and the IOC does not want you to go on the national trials because they are afraid from these decisions. That means that athletes, they are not citizens as the other ones. The consultancy firms, academic experts also are used by the IOC, and they have a huge machine to communicate. The Olympic broadcasting services, and also novelists and pseudo-historians, so my job is not so easy. And if you want to have some distance, just academic distance from the sporting institutions, you are accused to be against them. It's not my problem. I'm not against or for institutions. My question is to make my job to be the more honest possible. And my job is not to make the job of a IOC, of course. And I'm not working against them, of course, also. So they have official narratives, and to be an academic historian is not so easy. I go very quickly here. You have the Olympic Museum all over the world. You have Olympic study centers who want to involve themselves in the universities and to take the control of the academics. And it's a problem for all my colleagues in the world nowadays, not only on this special topic, which is about sport sciences, but we must be free for the freedom of the world. The researchers, they must be free also as the other citizens, but especially the researchers also as a journalist. So the IOC has built a counter-society, which is very interesting, very new, in fact, in the history of humanity, which is built on the idea of improving the body, improving the health, improving the education through sports, facilitating peace between nations and athletes. But it's also sometimes the sport or physical education were used to build the army. So this is the balance between peace building and war building through physical education. It's a big problem. And the balance between patriotism and internationalism is always at the core of international competitions, and particularly at the core of Olympics. Amateurism is sometimes in our minds something very pure. But at the beginnings, amateurism was a way to exclude people from the world of sports and from the clubs. Amateurism was used by the aristocrats and the high bourgeoisie to exclude people because they are workers, because they were women, or because they were living in countries which were under the colonial system and authority. So it was a big battle for workers, women, people non-valid also, and then people from the countries who were under the colonial control to get the possibility to participate. It was not so evident. It was a battle. And to control all the forces, Pierre de Coubertin, who was a very clever man, did imagine the ceremonial, the Olympic ceremonial, to control all the passions, all the tensions, and against the religions, against the states, against ideologies, but also against the merchants and the people who want to make money from sport. That was its idealistic idea. And the mottos invented are still in our minds. For example, faster, higher, stronger, or also the idea, do not mix sport and politics. Or nowadays, the IOC motto is different. So they changed it just before Tokyo Olympic Games in 2020-21. And they said faster, higher, stronger, and together. Because they did understand from the history that the motto, which is all about performance, could go to violence, drugs, tricks, and so on. So together means now there is a new ambition for the IOC. And it's a way to think of course, better the future. And it's a very plastic ideology because the IOC does not want the control of any justice in the world. So there is quite no reference to the big monuments of freedom and rights in the world inside the Olympic Charter. They changed a few things some years ago, just 2 years ago. Now they make a reference to the United Nations Declaration of Rights, but it's very new. And it is because there is a pressure of the public, the pressure of the people who are defending the rights and the liberties in the world. What is very unusual with this organization, perhaps you know this, or perhaps you do not, it is not built on a democratic system. In the international federation, for example, FIFA for soccer, one nation, one vote. In the IOC, all the members, they are co-opted since Pierre de Coubertin, since 1894. And there are nowadays there are 106 people, and they are coming from 70 nations. But the IOC recognizes 206 nations. That means more than the United Nations, which is 193. That's not fair, exactly, of course. But it's very protective for the institution because they are not under the threat of fighting to be elected. So as a citizen, I'm not in favor of a non-democratic cooptation of members, of course. But if these people are recruited in democratic and freedom circles, it could be perfect because they could not be under the pressure of authoritarian states or even democracies when they want to size Olympic Games. And it was gentlemen's agreement. They had no statute until 1981. It was what a colleague says, a club of old men, because they had no women until 1981. And nowadays, women are 46% of the IOC, but none of them had big responsibilities. And when you consider their biographies, there are just two women, one from Thailand and one from India, who are very big head of companies, of world-scale companies, but in front of them, they have 25 men at the head of big companies. For example, the representative for Senegal is the head of Credit Suisse, Swiss Credit, which is a very big bank in Switzerland. And the same for the head of a treasurer in the United States. He's from Latin America. That's the level of the people at the head of the IOC. And the women, you understand that they are far from the power. And a lot of countries also from the world. It's more than a rotary of world sports. It's a club, still nowadays, under the control of 25 men, in fact. They had only 8 presidents in 130 years, and they have now a very important administration. It's much more, it's quite now 500 employees and 500 consultants, audio consultants. It's a big machine. In the 1970s, it was only 30 people working there. You understand, in the 70s. Then had contracts with the sponsors from 1985, and now it's 1,000 people working in the IOC in Lausanne. It's just close to my desk in the university. And university, International Federation Sports, they are just on the ground above me. So we are inside the movement for international sport, because we have also in Lausanne 60 international sport federations, plus the IOC. So it's huge. And this institution has very public sessions, general assemblies, but the decisions are not mature there. It is outside the General Assembly, it's the executive committee. And there it's more the cult of Olympic secrecy. How does it work? How did the IOC manage to size the world and be the authoritative power? Because they are retrocessing, they are giving back money. You know, after each Summer Olympic years, the IOC earns $8 billion, and they give back the money, they say 90% back to the international federations and also the national Olympic committees. But there is no accountability exactly. They don't know where the money is going. So please Go back to your national Olympic committees and ask them where is the money and what they do with this money, because nobody knows exactly. It's a huge amount, $8 billion for sports, for athletes, for sports for all. It's very impressive. And so some international federations, they were fighting against the IOC during all this history. And nowadays the IOC seized again the power on them. What is very interesting is also the sporting program, because which are the sports there? All the sports coming from the Western side of the world. Just judo in 1964 for Tokyo, and taekwondo in 1988 for Seoul Games, and the Chinese, they tried to have wushu in 2008 in Beijing, but they did not have success. It's a very important question to have all the cultures of body movement represented in the Olympic Games. And the moving recently is about climbing, surf, skateboard, and breakdance for the first time in Paris, this time in Concorde Place. But that's not so common in Africa or Asia, for example. And that's a problem. The definition of the sporting program is in the hands of the IOC. But they choose the new sports which are close to the audiences who have money, and for the medias, of course. This is a very cuckoo strategy because they put the eggs in each capitals in the world. They took the money, and the states, they pay a lot for having the Olympic Games. Is it worth the money, for example, for France to spend $10 million, public and private money for organizing the Games in Paris next July? It is important for a country because you can produce a new country telling, you can have society building from the Olympic Games. So it could be a challenge very important, of course. And the problem is that it is largely used by the states not to promote peace between the nations, but to reinforce a country in the presence of the world. The IOC was under threat at many times in its history from authoritarian states, from the League of Nations, from the United Nations, and they are still here. They try to be independent, but they must be controlled, of course, but there is no force, no power to exert control on the IOC. So the control is the citizens of the world, the peoples. It's our duty, in fact, to make pressure on the IOC to be better, each time better. So just a few words for conclusion. Of course, there is a huge success of the Olympic Games in the recent years, in the last century also. It is not because it's the result of the clash of nationalisms. It is not only because it's a global spectacle. It is because it is a formidable indicator of the expectations of the peoples of the world. This is my lecture and my lesson about the Olympic Games. It means that if all the people are so enthusiastic with Olympic Games, it is because they are all desiring peace and justice and liberty. And it's up to all of us to put pressure on the IOC so that it assumes its mission without trembling to defend peace, freedom, and fraternity against all the regimes that crush peoples and individuals. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think we have time for a few questions. Do we have any questions? If you do, please raise your hand and wait for a microphone. Any questions? If you do, raise your hand. I'm going to take the first one then. What's a pseudo-historian?
Sorry, what?
What's a pseudo-historian?
Doesn't sound.
Vous avez marqué pseudo-historien.
Ah, it's people who are not educated to be historians. So they are they are using just part of the sources. They have a lot of biases in the analysis. They are not confronting the production of history with the academic historians. They are not reading the bibliography which is produced by university historians. So they are living outside our world, but they are sponsored by the sporting institutions. Some of them, they could be fair and make the job, but most of them are not doing the job, particularly on this subject, which is very controversial.
So they're bought to write official history?
Yes, they are paid or honored. They had honors from the IOC and the National Olympic Committees to write the history they want to be written. And it's this part of, this is a subject which is, it's not the same for all the part of the histories. History of sport is very special because we have people who are fond with sports, we have sport journalists, we have collectioners also, and they want to write their history, but it's all about what is wonderful, and they have a very naive way to understand sport. And if you want to be more balanced in your work, you are accused to be against the institution. So it's very impossible. That's why I wanted to stress that. I'm sorry, but I must defend my my family.
Sorry, as an addition to that, your definition of a pseudo-historian, how does that definition not pass on to any historian? Where we live in a world where it's common that history is written by the victors.
Yeah.
And I come from a country where we've had to rewrite the history that was written by official historians who match all the criteria that you say, only they were sanctioned by the apartheid government.
Yeah.
History is now being rewritten by a group of historians who are sanctioned by the ANC government. What makes any historian not a pseudo-historian?
The question is about to be honest, to be the closest possible to the reality of the facts, not fake news, and to be able to change minds and to have controversy with other peoples. But these pseudo-historians, they do not want to have any controversy. They are in their own village, and there is no way to exchange ideas and to work on the base of proof. This is evidence. It's about sources, archives, interviews, and then we can talk to be in a gentle way, of course, and then we can all collectively we can go head on. Good to go. It's the only way. And it's easy for me to say that because I'm a French working in Switzerland. Of course. So it's my duty to say that. Yes, please.
So thank you for your presentation, very comprehensive. A lot of things that I think a lot of us didn't know. To continue in this vein of pseudo-historian and connecting it with one of the other points you made about plastic ideology, can you elaborate on the connection? What is the role of the pseudo-historian in relation to propagating plastic ideology?
Hand over your sentence.
What's the connection? Could you elaborate on what connection there may be between this idea of pseudo-historian and another term that you had in your presentation, plastic ideology?
Yeah.
What's the role of the pseudo-historian in propagating plastic ideology? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this very important question. What is at the core of Olympism is the idea of neutrality. and neutralism and apoliticism. And so the pseudo-historians, they make that way if there were no tensions, no confrontations, no powers struggling inside sport. If you go to the Olympic Museum in Lausanne, there is nothing about the boycotts. In 1976, 29 countries from Africa did boycott the games in Montreal. There is nothing about Moscow boycott in 1980, nothing about Los Angeles boycott in 1984, nothing about the Tommy Smith and John Carlos fist in Mexico 68, and nothing about Hitler in 1936. It's a very neutralized history, which is not reality. That's the problem. And these pseudo-historians, they are giving a support to the idea of neutrality. But the IOC itself is not neutral, as you did understand probably. That's why us, as citizens, we have to push the IOC to be better. It's a good idea, anyway, to have people gathering with sport relations. But we must not be naive about the uses of sporting relations by people who are not in favor of liberty and democracy. That's the point.
Thank you, sir, for your excellent articulation of Olympic Games. I am Said, and I came from Japan. So my question is, in every Olympic Games, we experience some ban on some athletes for taking forbidden drugs. However, the athletes who received that ban, they claim that there is a lack of communication from IOC. So my question is, why this type of lack of communication is created where some athletes are taking forbidden drugs?
You know, it's very new in the Olympic history to find the people who were cheating with drugs. It's just from the 1960s. And it was at the period during the Cold War, or when the USSR and East Germany, they were first and second on the medals. And the USA, they thought they could be doped, drugged, and so they put pressure on the IOC. But we knew also we had athletes from the Western world and particularly from the US who were using drugs also. So the IOC takes a stance and they change things. The problem is who is able to fight. The IOC wanted the WADA, which is World Anti-Doping Agency, to be in Lausanne under the control only of sporting federations and the IOC. But the government said no. And now it is in Ottawa, Canada, and it's mixed. You have 50% of the representative from the states, 50% from the sporting world. But the question then is, who is making the control? And in which conditions? That was the problem in Sochi, when the secret services from Russia, they had their building close to the building where they were the, je sais pas comment on dit, éprouvette, the testing, yes. And so they changed the testing. That's why Russia had to participate without the name of the country and without the flag and the uniform in Rio de Janeiro, 2016, and Tokyo again, and again in Paris also. And they are outside the Athletics International Federation until today for this. That's a very big problem. Some of my colleagues coming from medicine, they say, it is no way. We are not able to find the new dopings. So it's like an escalator, you know. You find new products and they invent new products. And the anti-doping system is still late in front of the new inventions. So they said better to liberalize the doping under the control of doctors to protect the athletes. That's a very civic debate. Anyway, we are at a time now they are modifying some genetics inside the athletes. There are huge problems with this question. So I think there is no solution which is so easy. I know it's for the athletes who are without taking drugs, it's more than shame for their careers because they lost the medals against people who are cheating, of course. It reflects our hope of a world without cheating also. And that's a hope for me. But your question is like a big hope because we have in our hearts that cheating is not good. And we make our best. And I think anti-doping, they are making their best. But so the IOC changed. They invented a new institution, which is called ITA, International Testing Authority. And now there are these people who are making the control, not the national anti-doping agencies. But can they go inside the countries? Can they be after each athlete? This is a problem also of liberty, because I don't know if you know that, but the athletes, they had to communicate where they are living every day to their international federations. And they could be controlled during the night, during the days, at any time. I'm not sure you will not agree with this in your own job.
We have time for one more question. It has to be a quick question with a quick answer.
Can we ask you to stand up as well if you're asking a question, just for the photographer?
Thank you, Prof, for the provoking presentation. But my question, I wanted to ask, what is it that the Olympic Committee can do in order not to demoralize the young kids to participate in the Olympics? For example, if somebody is found with this genetics, whatever, that person didn't choose to born be like that. And then now they are said they need to use drugs. What if there are kids who are still growing and then they are motivating that in order for you to become this person, meaning that now they are trying to demoralize the passion from the kids, also the dreams that they can participate in the Olympics. I think there's something that needs to be done, because now if they are coming out saying that we don't want people to use drugs, but now you have to use it for you not to become this person, meaning that now you are fighting with nature. What can be done? Thank you, Prof.
I'm not the head of the IOC. But I have some ideas, of course. For example, to protect the athletes and the heads of sporting federations from authoritarian states. The United Nations could take the floor on this question and to give protection to the athletes as if they were ambassadors. It's very important because they must be free to walk all around the world and to take the floor. The same for the heads of the sporting federations. They must be protected by United Nations. That's the point. And then about drugs, of course, it's a big battle. We must not abandon this battle. And if you have in mind Caster Semenya, for example, she was discriminated as a woman coming from South Africa, also as an African woman. And it is not justice. It is not fair. And here, it's our power as citizens of the world to put the pressure on the sporting institutions, which are largely male institutions still nowadays.